In 1982, country music witnessed something nobody expected. The night Gene Watson went head-to-head with George Jones at the Grand Ole Opry. What happened next would change both men's careers forever. After spending months digging through archive footage and interviewing witnesses who were there that night, I discovered the real story behind one of country music's most legendary showdowns. The date was October 15, 1982. The Grand Ole Opry was packed to the rafters, but nobody in that audience knew they were about to witness a moment that would become part of country music folklore. George Jones, already crowned the king of country music, was riding high with his recent hit, Still Doin' Time. Gene Watson, though respected for his pure country voice, was still fighting to prove himself among Nashville's elite. What started as a typical Friday night at the Opry would turn into anything but ordinary when Jones made an offhand comment backstage. Those words would spark one of the most memorable vocal battles in country music history. A showdown that would earn Watson the respect he deserved and teach Jones a lesson in humility he never forgot. But here's the thing. Most of what you've heard about that night isn't the whole truth. The real story, pieced together from eyewitness accounts and never-before-shared details, reveals something far more compelling than the usual retelling. In the next few minutes, I'll take you backstage at the Opry that night. You'll learn what really sparked the showdown, witness the performance that left even George Jones speechless, and discover how this one night changed the trajectory of both men's careers. But to truly understand the magnitude of what happened that night, we need to step back and look at where country music stood in 1982, and why this showdown meant so much more than just two men trying to outsing each other. Country music in 1982 was at a crossroads. The slick urban cowboy sound was dominating the airwaves, pushing aside the traditional country style that had defined the genre for decades. Artists like Kenny Rogers in Alabama were topping the charts with their polished pop country sound, while pure country singers were struggling to maintain their foothold. George Jones stood as the last undisputed king of traditional country. Despite his personal demons and notorious no-shows that earned him the nickname No-Show Jones, his voice remained unmatched. His 1980 hit, He Stopped Loving Her Today, had reasserted his dominance, winning every major award and reminding everyone why he was considered the greatest country singer alive. By '82, he was selling out shows nationwide and commanding respect from every corner of the industry. Gene Watson, on the other hand, represented the old guard trying to survive in this changing landscape. His crystal-clear tenor voice and dedication to traditional country had earned him hits like Farewell Party and Love in the Hot Afternoon. But the industry was pushing him to modernize his sound. Despite his vocal prowess, Watson was still viewed as a regional Texas success rather than a national star. The Grand Ole Opry remained country music's most hallowed stage, where authenticity still mattered more than commercial success. Every Friday and Saturday night, legends and newcomers alike would gather backstage, sharing stories and sometimes engaging in friendly competition. It was one of the few places where the purity of country music still held sway over commercial considerations. That October night, the Opry's lineup was particularly strong. Along with Jones and Watson, the evening featured performances by Bill Monroe, Loretta Lynn, and several other country stalwarts. The backstage area was buzzing with energy, as it often did when George Jones was scheduled to appear, assuming he showed up. The changing landscape wasn't just affecting the music, it was reshaping the entire industry. Record labels were pushing their artists toward crossover appeal, often at the expense of traditional country elements. Even the legendary Ernest Tubb had recently commented that he hardly recognized country music anymore. The genre was splitting into two camps, those embracing the new sound and those fighting to preserve tradition. For George Jones, this shift hadn't affected his status much. His voice was so extraordinary that even pop country producers wanted to work with him. His recent album, Still the Same Old Me, had proven he could maintain his traditional sound while still charting high. Plus, his tumultuous relationship with Tammy Wynette kept him in the spotlight, even when he wasn't releasing new music. Gene Watson's situation was more precarious. Despite having one of the finest voices in country music, he was facing increasing pressure from his label to contemporize his sound. His latest single, This Dream's on Me, was struggling to climb the charts, not because of its quality, but because it was considered too country for radio. Watson had famously said in an interview that month, "I'd rather sell fewer records than sell out the music I believe in." The Grand Ole Opry represented a refuge from these commercial pressures. Founded in 1925, it remained the one place where traditional country music wasn't just accepted, it was expected. The Opry's commitment to authenticity had made it the longest-running radio broadcast in U.S. history. Its wooden stage, worn smooth by countless performances, had hosted every country music legend from Hank Williams to Patsy Cline. But what happened in that backstage area just hours before the showdown would set the stage for a confrontation nobody saw coming. A simple comment from Jones, overheard by the wrong person, would ignite a powder keg of professional pride and musical rivalry. The backstage area of the Opry was always a hive of activity on show nights, but the energy felt different that evening. George Jones had actually shown up early, a rare occurrence that had everyone buzzing. He was in good spirits, holding court near his dressing room, sharing stories with fellow performers and crew members. His recent sobriety had made these appearances more reliable, though nobody ever took a Jones appearance for granted. Gene Watson arrived around 7 p.m., dressed in his signature Western suit, his quiet demeanor a stark contrast to Jones's larger-than-life presence. Watson had just finished a string of shows in Texas and Oklahoma, where he consistently packed houses. But here at the Opry, in the presence of Jones and other legends, he was still viewed as something of an outsider. The tension began when Jones, responding to a comment about up-and-coming singers, made his now infamous declaration, "There ain't a man alive who can out-sing me when I'm right." It was typical Jones bravado, the kind of statement he'd made countless times before. But this time was different. This time, Watson was within earshot. Those who were there say Watson's expression never changed, but something shifted in his eyes. For years, he'd dealt with comparisons to Jones, with critics calling him the poor man's George Jones, despite his own distinctive style and impressive vocal range. He'd always shown respect to Jones, considering him a musical hero. But even heroes can push too far. Ralph Emery, the legendary country music broadcaster who was backstage that night, later recalled, "You could feel the atmosphere change. Gene had too much respect for George to say anything. But you could tell those words hit him hard. He'd been proving himself his whole career, and here was Jones, dismissing everyone in one breath." The next hour was charged with unspoken tension. Both men were scheduled to perform that night, Jones in the first segment, Watson in the second. The original schedule had them doing their standard hits. Jones was set to perform "Still Doing Time," while Watson was slated for "Farewell Party." The Opry stage manager, Bud Wendell, sensed the brewing tension and tried to keep the two singers separated. He'd seen enough backstage drama in his years at the Opry to know when something was building. But in the close quarters backstage, separation wasn't really possible. What made the situation even more charged was the presence of several music journalists, including Robert K. Ehrman, who'd come specifically to cover Jones's performance. Word of Jones's sobriety and renewed dedication to performing had made this appearance newsworthy. Nobody expected they'd be witnessing a much bigger story. Adding to the pressure, several record executives were in attendance that night, including Watson's label head. The industry was still debating Watson's commercial direction, and this Opry appearance was meant to be a straightforward performance to promote his latest single. The label wanted him to play it safe, stick to the plan, and avoid any controversy. Meanwhile, Jones continued holding court backstage, either unaware or unconcerned about the impact of his words. He'd built his reputation not just on his voice, but on his ability to deliver a song with unmatched emotional intensity. His confidence wasn't just bravado. He'd earned it through decades of performances that left audiences spellbound. But Watson had something to prove, and those close to him could see it in his preparation. Instead of his usual pre-show routine of quiet warm-ups, he was intensely focused, pacing in his dressing room. His band members exchanged worried glances, knowing their leader was preparing for something more than just another Opry performance. But what happened next would throw that careful planning out the window. As Jones took the stage for his performance, nobody, not even Watson himself, could have predicted how the night was about to unfold, or how it would permanently change both men's legacies. George Jones took the stage first, greeted by thunderous applause. In typical Jones fashion, he started with his current hit, Still Doin' Time. His voice was in peak form that night, clear, powerful, and full of that distinctive Jones heartbreak. The audience responded with enthusiasm, but Jones wasn't done. Perhaps feeling the electricity in the air, or maybe sensing the challenge brewing, he launched into He Stopped Loving Her Today. From the wings, Gene Watson watched intently. Those standing near him said he never took his eyes off Jones, studying every note, every inflection. Jones was delivering one of those performances that had earned him his reputation, the kind that reminded everyone why he was called the Possum, able to slide in and around notes in ways that seemed impossible. When Jones finished, the audience erupted. He took his bow with the confident smile of a man who knew he'd just thrown down the gauntlet. As he walked off stage, he passed Watson with a knowing look. The challenge had been issued. What happened next would become country music legend. Instead of performing his planned song, Watson stepped to the microphone and said, "I'd like to do a special one tonight." His band, though caught off guard, recognized the opening notes of Farewell Party. But this wasn't going to be the standard version. From the first note, it was clear Watson had brought something extra. His voice, always pristine, found new depths of emotion and technical brilliance. He hit notes that made veteran performers backstage shake their heads in disbelief. By the time he reached the song's signature high notes, the audience was completely silent, transfixed by what they were witnessing. But Watson wasn't finished. In a move nobody expected, he transitioned into When a Man Can't Get a Woman Off His Mind, a song that showcased his entire vocal range. Those present say he hit notes that night they'd never heard him reach before or since. Even Jones, watching from the wings, couldn't maintain his usual stoic expression. The performance left the Opry audience stunned, but what happened immediately afterward, in the backstage area where this whole thing started, would prove even more remarkable. A conversation between these two legends would reshape their relationship and influence country music for years to come. The backstage area erupted in chaos as soon as Watson left the stage. Artists, musicians, and industry veterans who had witnessed countless Opry performances were buzzing with excitement. Many would later say they'd never experienced anything quite like it in all their years at the historic venue. The first person to approach Watson was, surprisingly, George Jones himself. Those present recall a moment of tension as Jones walked up, his expression unreadable. Then, in a gesture that spoke volumes, Jones extended his hand and said something that would be repeated in country music circles for years to come. "Son, I didn't know anybody could sing like that anymore." This moment of humility from Jones, known for his pride in his vocal abilities, sent shockwaves through the Nashville community. Ralph Emery, who witnessed the exchange, later wrote in his memoirs, "It was like watching a passing of the torch, though George wasn't done by any means. It was more like watching someone welcome another member to a very exclusive club." The industry impact was immediate. Record executives who had been pushing Watson to modernize his sound suddenly backed off. His traditional approach had just received the ultimate validation. By the next morning, word of the Showdown had spread throughout Nashville, with phones ringing off the hook at both singers' management offices. The press coverage was extensive. Billboard magazine's country music editor wrote a piece titled, "The Night Traditional Country Fought Back," using the Watson-Jones Showdown as a symbol of traditional country music's enduring power. The article suggested that perhaps the industry's push toward pop country had been premature. Watson's booking rate doubled within weeks. Venues that had previously seen him as a regional act were now calling to secure dates. His next single, released just 2 months after the Opry performance, climbed higher on the charts than any of his previous releases, despite maintaining his steadfastly traditional style. But the real impact of that night would extend far beyond immediate career boosts or industry buzz. The ripple effects would influence a whole new generation of country singers and help preserve a style of country music that many had feared was disappearing forever. The Watson-Jones Showdown became more than just a legendary Opry moment. It evolved into a symbol of traditional country music's resilience. In an era when the industry was pushing toward pop country crossover, this event reminded everyone that pure country singing could still captivate audiences and command respect. The relationship between Watson and Jones transformed after that night. What began as a rivalry blossomed into a mutual admiration society. Jones began regularly praising Watson in interviews, often citing him as one of the few singers who kept it country. They would go on to share stages numerous times over the years, each performance drawing crowds eager to witness their vocal magic. Young artists coming up in the late 80s and early 90s frequently cited the Watson-Jones Showdown as an inspiration. Alan Jackson, who was just starting his career in 1982, later said, "That night proved you didn't have to change your style to make an impact. You just had to be the best at what you do." Randy Travis, another traditionalist who would emerge later in the decade, credited the event with helping pave the way for his own traditional style. The Opry itself gained renewed prestige from the evening. While always revered, the Showdown reinforced its reputation as the place where real country music lived. The venue began promoting more special moments between artists, though none would quite capture the lightning-in-a-bottle magic of the Watson-Jones encounter. Perhaps most importantly, the event helped preserve a style of singing that might otherwise have faded away. The technical brilliance both men displayed that night, the subtle nuances, the emotional delivery, the masterful control, became a blueprint for aspiring country vocalists. Even today, singing teachers in Nashville use recordings from that era, including Watson and Jones performances, to teach proper country vocal technique. As we wrap up this remarkable story, it's worth noting that both men would look back on that October night as a defining moment in their careers, though for very different reasons. Their final reflections on the event, shared years later, would reveal just how much that unplanned showdown meant to country music history. Looking back, that October night in 1982 represented something bigger than just two men trying to outdo each other. It was a moment when country music's past and present collided, proving that authentic country music could still move audiences in ways that no other genre could. George Jones would later write in his autobiography, "I learned something that night, that there's always somebody out there who can remind you to stay humble." He and Watson remained friends until Jones's passing in 2013. Gene Watson, still performing today, often reflects on that evening as the night that changed everything, though he remains characteristically modest about his role in the showdown. The Grand Ole Opry still stands as country music's most revered stage, and stories of the Watson-Jones Showdown are still shared backstage before performances. It serves as a reminder that in country music, authenticity and talent will always matter more than commercial trends. As we see country music continuing to evolve today, with debates still raging about what constitutes real country, the Watson-Jones Showdown reminds us that the heart of country music lies not in production styles or commercial appeal, but in the ability to move people with genuine emotion and extraordinary vocal talent. If you enjoyed this deep dive into country music history, make sure to subscribe to Southern Sound. We're dedicated to preserving and sharing these important moments that shape the genre we love. Next week, we'll explore another fascinating story about the day Merle Haggard almost quit country music entirely, and the legend who convinced him to stay. Drop a comment below with your thoughts about the Watson-Jones Showdown. Were you there that night? Have you heard other versions of this story? Let's keep these important country music memories alive together.